Foothills Ranch.
Oh, okay, yeah, word. We're right down the street. We're on North Point, right off of base.
Okay, yeah. It was funny that everything started popping up like pretty close by it, like after I was divested from California.
Yeah, it took me a minute, but it was it was. I didn't really look, man. I got such a nice severance package because I'd been there for so long. I took like a 3 month vacation and just enjoyed family time.
Yeah, I had a couple near misses that were going to keep me in California, and then even Carbine was looking at rehiring me about 6 months after the initial shakeup, and then it didn't pan out, and was probably for the best anyway.
Yeah, where Christine, I think it was, she hit me up a few months after, and I told her that I would never work for them again. And then I don't know, maybe 6 months before they closed down, they hit me up. But I was over at Obsidian, I was doing just fine, and then they ended up shutting down anyway. So
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna give students I think 2 more minutes before we get started. I was hoping for a better turnout than this because like when we were doing these in person, we were getting like 60 plus people per show.
no worries, man. With the world ending, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, everybody's freaking out by the COVID.
Yep.
It's a Rona.
Today is also the first day of the exam.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking there might be a little bit of that. I think
Everybody's try harding.
yeah. So probably the people we got in here are diehard, absolutely want to be video game artists.
Right on. This is I did a high school talk, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 months ago. That was a lot of fun. Seniors that are about to graduate and get into the kind of the real world.
Yeah. It was funny when I was still with Carbine. I gave one of those speeches to the big video game design group at Cal State Long Beach, and then a week
Oh yeah.
later, I got shit canned.
Dude, I swear they just put all our names up on a wall in some suit up at NC South through darts to lay us all off, man. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. But can't say it wasn't a valuable experience.
Oh, for sure, man. I just hope that none of your students expect any form of stability in this industry.
Oh, that's like pretty
I
much.
think everybody in the games industry has that story from one place or another.
Yeah, I pretty much we got our first "So you want to be a game designer" talk, and that was basically the point I drove home. I said, "This is an industry that you should not expect to retire from a single studio. Expect to move around and like jump from project to project."
Yeah, well, yeah. Don't really plan on retiring. I'll fix that for you. You're just gonna die in your chair. It's fine.
Yeah, the guy I know in California, he basically just switched job as lead designer like every a year and a half or so.
And that's basically the truth.
And that's actually why I transitioned away from it, was because I'm like, I got to, 34, 35 and started looking at my life and I'm like, do I want to die pushing pixels? I don't know that the answer to that is yes anymore. And so I'm like, okay, what can I do that is a sort of, tertiary industry that I can kind of easily transition into? And so I just started picking up IT certifications and kind of went that route. And that's been really good to me. It was a hard road the first 2-3 years, but it's starting to pay off now. So I'm pretty happy about that.
I just switched careers inside the games industry. I've done rigging and animating, hard surface modeling, and now I'm doing environment art. So
nice. Yeah, I actually started as a level designer. Did level design for the first 3 to 5 years that I was in the industry, and then switched over to environment art after that, and then did some rigging as well. So did sort of a similar thing myself.
Yeah, you have to in this industry. You get restless otherwise.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. If people trickle in, they'll just have to play catch up. Hey, Quan, do you have the thing to start recording?
Yes.
Okay, you want to hit record? Oh, Chad, you okay with being recorded?
Yeah, dude, of course, man.
Okay, no worries. It looks like we have a couple people that can't speak, but they can hear us. So basically, I'm going to run like kind of a moderator issue here, where if you can't speak, just go ahead and type your question into the chat to me, and I'll make sure that the folks know what the question is. If you want it directed to either Chad or to Corey specifically, just be sure you let me know that. And with that, I guess we can get started. Are you ready to record, Quan?
Yes.
All right, go ahead. All right, welcome everybody to Game Dev Dialogues, episode 4, Enter the Artists. Tonight we have and Chad Elliott, two colleagues of mine that I met in my travels during my experience in the game industry, and they're going to talk to us tonight about their experiences pushing pixels, as Corey poignantly put it, in the video game industry. So basically, we're going to let each of them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their background and where they've worked, what they're working on now, basically kind of free ranging. And then we're going to open it up to questions from our audience. Let's see here. Chad, you're alphabetically in order. I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, sounds good. I'm Chad Elliott. I've been in the games industry for just over a decade now. I've worked at Carbine, Obsidian Entertainment, and right now I'm at Turtle Rock Studios. I've worked on everything from VR titles to giant waste of time MMOs. Right now I'm working on Back for Blood, which people like to call Left 4 Dead 3.
Okay, Corey.
Corey Ferris, started out working for Icarus Studios back in 2003. Worked for them for about 6 years as like a tech demo. Tired of doing that, and then switched over to working for Lockheed Martin on serious games. Did a 1-year contract there. Went back to Icarus Studios after that. After I found out that the corporate world working for government contractors was not for me, and then pushed out on Earth, as Chad put it, giant waste of time MMO. That game actually lasted for 10 years, amazingly. After leaving that, I formed a game company of my own, named it Ironfoot Studios. Worked with two former colleagues there for 3 or 4 years until hackers killed my business. But basically, in the interim, I made a few titles and a couple of mobile games. So, yep, that was my time in the games industry. And now I've actually transitioned away to IT, and I'm in the medical field doing IT security now. So, yep.
Okay, excellent. Actually, I want to, before I open up the floor, I got a couple questions. When you say hackers destroyed your business, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so back in 2015, there was a hacker group that called themselves LulzSec. It was basically a bunch of script kiddies going around to coffee shops and using a botnet they had picked up to DDoS different video game studios, and they were taking requests. Well, the Fallen Earth server cluster was on the same server cluster as APB. And someone suggested that they take down APB, and so they did. And when they took down APB, it took us down for a month. And prior to that, we had about 120,000 concurrent users per month, and no one could get into the game for a month-ish. And we lost about 35% of our users then, and had a 10% churn rate afterwards. So it basically just, went from a decent amount of revenue down to just nothing, and just petered out after that. And that was our big cash cow. So we were using the revenue from that to make like mobile games and doing support for like helping out other games industry people in the area with, like, we would make assets for them or this, that, or the other, and get paid kind of that way. But after the Fallen Earth cash cow kind of died, that left us holding the bag for anything else, and we're kind of like, okay, we can't really keep it going past 2016, and so I had to kind of reinvent myself after that.
Okay, cool. All right. Let's see. Does anybody have a question for Corey or Chad?
I will get started. You guys work on you guys mentioned you both have experience with environmental art, right?
I do, yeah.
Okay. How important is it to when you design the environment to keep in mind of the performance, especially with the camera and coding and that kind of stuff?
We're right now experiencing major issues with memory and testing on the Xbox One platform specifically. Our mesh memory for props is only 650 megs in order to get a build running on the Xbox One. So it's extremely important if say like a small prop is only used once, it's not gameplay specific. And you know, if my Collier is taking up a lot of memory, but it's only used one time, basically we have to cut it. Yeah, it's extremely important.
Cool, cool.
Corey, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I remember back another game that I worked on was called Knee Deep, and we had to pay close attention to the batch count. So basically, any object that had a single texture on it, you want to maximize the usage of that texture. So you basically take and say, okay, how many different objects can I map to this texture and use the same shader for that texture so that you can keep that memory count low, and just basically save on poly count that way by creating the normal maps in such a way to where you can maximize this one texture and shader and use it across a bunch of different objects.
We in VR we had to go the extra route where we were working on a game. Our whole entire environment, all the architecture and all of the props, including any items and weapons that you would pick up, were literally on one texture sheet. We had a base color sheet and a PBR sheet, and that was it. Every single item was on that one sheet. So that was VR. You know, we were back in the PS1 days, working for the Oculus Quest. But yeah.
It's just a slight follow up because I have noticed that whenever I interact with, especially the animation students, one of the big issue is that im they have this image in their mind on what they want the scenes to look like. So whenever they start to work on project, they will start to put trees here and put scenes there because that's what they imagine scenes would be if they were to look at things from above and show them from basically like from above the point of view. Like if they want to see from this angle, that's what they want scenes to look like. But I keep on going in there whenever these things I keep on mentioning to them that they may want to spread this thing out a bit or at least layering then in a certain way where when the camera pans through, it won't basically just completely create a stutter. So so it sounds like it's just a difference in the on how things going to be look like. So do you guys have any recommendation on like the workflow, how to start out? Because I personally I don't think it's a good idea for you to have a giant image on how things is going to look like and work toward that goal for a couple months until you realize that it doesn't run and you have to basically spend a lot of time break down the scene to redistribute the assets. So what kind of workflow you guys use?
Well, first of all, if you're adding a bunch of detail but it doesn't add to the silhouette, then you're going in the wrong direction. Your silhouette, if your silhouettes look good, then all the other stuff is extra flavor and bonus. But yeah, if you're wasting a bunch of time adding little trinkets and stuff, especially in a video game, you got to realize that even on a 4K texture, if your character is this big on the screen because your camera's way out here, you're not going to see any of that stuff anyways. Characters, your character looks good. You get LOD level 0, right? But all the other characters on screen, especially like in an MMO, they're not going to get LOD 0. So all of the detail and everything you put in is gone anyways, right off the bat.
Yeah, and you mentioned the environment, adding all this extra detail, and then never seeing it. It's also important to try and think about the areas that the camera is actually going to pan across. Because if you're never going to see it, you may as well House of Cards that and just completely cut it from the scene altogether, because it's just going to end up slowing down your render time.
And you also have to think that we had an instance at Carbine where I put 20 bones into a tree, and it was a hero tree. It was only supposed to be used once. It's never going to be used once. A world artist is going to get a hold of it. A designer is going to get a hold of it. Someone's going to get a hold of it, and you're going to end up with 15 of those things in one little level, and your performance is going to tank. So it's never going to be used once.
World builder goes, man, I like this tree. I'm going to freaking use it everywhere. And then all of a sudden, you've got 35 of them, and
you're relying on your graphics programmer to optimize your proprietary engine. It's not fun.
Yeah, I remember an instance at Fallen Earth where we had a wheelbarrow full of eyeballs, and it was, hundreds of objects.
Hundreds of objects and hundreds of thousands of polygons, and you get a ticket from QA saying, why does my frame rate go to 5 frames per second in this one area? And then you have to kind of bring up the command prompt while in the game, and when you walk into the area, you see 500,000 eyeballs loading in the scene. You go, oh, that's why.
If you could talk to us a little bit about different workflow systems that you've encountered in your travels, like working with Agile or Scrum, or like what you found worked the best, what didn't work at all, and just kind of like riff on that for a little bit.
Go ahead, Corey.
Okay. Yeah, I remember we used Scrum for a long while at FE. We had sprints that we would do, so we would basically plan out 3 or 4 sprints ahead of time and say, okay, these are the goals, these are the objectives, these are the deliverables for this sprint. Basically, then hand out each work package to different artists or different level designers, and then just have them report back during daily stand-ups. And so you basically have the thing that you would be working on for the duration of that sprint. You just kind of report back, any impediments that you had for that sprint, anything that was in your way, any resources that you need. Say like, hey, I need an animator you mentioned the 15 bone tree that you had. Need an animator to actually jump in here for 2-3 hours to make this thing look believable, and kind of manage the resources that way. And it's interesting because FE was kind of, Fallen Earth was kind of floundering before this got implemented. And when I remember Anthony Castoro came in, and he's like, we need to do sprints in an ordered environment with scrums. And as soon as that happened, you could actually start seeing this forward momentum in the game. And it was interesting seeing that because, like I said, I started at the company in 2003, and I left in 2007 because I got tired of seeing it go nowhere. And when I came back, it was on the condition that I was able to work on Fallen Earth alone. Because prior to that, I had been pulled off on all these different projects, left and right. And when I came back, I was like, look, if I can work on just this one game, I'm happy to come back. And I did. And about 3 or 4 months after I started back is when they implemented the Scrum. And it was like night and day. We actually, from the time I came back on in 2008 to when we released the game in late 2009, we actually had a finished playable game rather than just a tech demo. It was pretty impressive to see. So yeah, I would definitely say that that game would not have been released if it weren't for implementing Agile and sprints, for sure.
I think my really only experience with any of that was Carbine, and I don't know, we got to the point where there was too much red tape, and a 30-second task would take 3 days just because everyone had to approve it. I don't know, maybe they were just doing it wrong, but they cared too much about tracking all of our time instead of what was getting checked in, I think. And now at Turtle Rock, all of our desks are on wheels. We've got two plugs, power and Ethernet, and if we want to move our desk to a different part of the building or whatever, just to work with the people that we're working with, it's really slick, really easy. Our producers are easygoing, and I think a loosey goosey kind of a feel works for our studio at least.
It's good to know. And yeah, since I've worked with both of you, I know how the contact and the different workflows worked at each place. And yeah, I was a little miffed that we did not have Agile Scrum at Carbine, to be honest, after coming from Fallen Earth, where we were hitting on all pistons with a relatively small team, and it just really did work very well. So yeah, I always promote, Agile Scrums and stand up and things like that. So I've seen it both ways on two different MMOs. Let me see. Do you have any questions from the group yet? No, not yet. Talk a little bit about what you would recommend to people wanting to get into video game art, as far as what they should be putting on their resumes and how they should be building their portfolios. And then we will have a question from a student after that.
ArtStation is really big right now. It has been for a while. The main thing I want to say about that, though, is if it's not your best stuff, don't put it up, because we're going to judge you on your worst piece, essentially. So now I might go against what some of your teachers are telling you. They might want you to be putting everything up for a grade or whatever, but as soon as that grade is in, if it's not your best stuff, take it down. As soon as you apply for a job, we're judging you on your worst piece. And, if your stuff doesn't impress us in the first 5 minutes, probably less, of looking at it, we're not going to consider you. And if there's a bad piece right up front, you're automatically, it took me 5 seconds to see, I didn't like that piece. You're not what I'm looking for. Unfortunately, I work 10 hours a day as it is. So if you don't catch my attention really, really quickly, you're out.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. It's far better to put one, like, blow me out of the water piece up there and have that be your only thing in the portfolio. If it's absolutely fantastic, put that one piece up and then leave the rest of it out. Much better to have one piece that's amazing than a bunch of mediocrity, for sure.
All right, that's excellent advice. Our first.
Before we move on to the next question, can I have a follow up on that?
Sure.
I actually have some art students went to local game conferences and have their portfolio getting evaluated. And one of let's say unnamed game development company, they seem to have the mentality that the portfolio need to contain only very high quality, like the very high polygon kind of stuff. But since a lot of my students are the scenery and environment designers, so especially when we work on mobile and WebGL stuff, we focus on getting low polygon objects to look very good, and they take those models to the portfolio evaluation, and they were basically getting trashed, saying that their stuff is terrible. So, do you guys have any suggestion on that, on how to basically build portfolio for those kind of evaluation?
It really depends on what you're going for. We hired a guy at Obsidian. I was on the vehicle team for Armored Warfare, and the guy's main piece that everybody liked was a high poly F100 old school Ford pickup truck, and it was high poly. It was all just basic materials added to the reflectors into the paint. There was no UV shown. There was none of that, but the truck looked like it could pop off the page. And then at Carbine, when we were looking at environment artists, we hired, I don't remember who it was, but there was this one girl that had it was like a hut, but the hut was just ridiculous. I mean, it was super stylized. It had a real like World of Warcraft kind of an art style to it, which was good because WildStar had a cartoony feel. And basically that was, we all got stuck on that one environment piece. So I don't know, two totally different styles. but two different teams as well. We were looking for different things. Nowadays, I'm in on the animation reels and interviews, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the suits and the upper guys are looking for because some of the stuff that I think is really good, they shoot down right away. So
It's interesting too, like as the person trying to get the job, like you want to kind of tailor what you're putting up there to the studio you're trying to get into. And that's the hard part too, because like every studio has its own kind. So like if you're trying to go and get a job with, Unreal with Epic, then they're going to want to see these really high quality ZBrushed models that you spent hundreds of hours to make look absolutely phenomenal. But if you're trying to go and get a job over at Riot Games, they're going to want to see a low poly stylized character that looks interesting visually with its silhouette, like getting the most out of the silhouette for the low poly setup that you've added to it. So, depending on what you're going for is what type of pieces you're going to want to put and you're going to want to submit to those studios. Kind of, and then getting past that into the art test too is a good thing as well.
Yeah, you have to know your audience. I think is the basis, the basic point.
Let's see, we do have a question from the gallery. It's from Alexander with an add-on. So first of all, it's asking how much coding does it take to move, like, for example, a hand or an object across a screen? And the follow-up to that is how many times you have to make the same hand to make a fluid motion?
Well, okay, so for the animating, I'm not sure the code required. No idea. Technical animators, technical artists, we're a very odd bunch. If we're not a modeler or a texturer or an animator, you're kind of just lumped into the tech art category. But I've done animating and a lot of rigging. And one, like, for a walk cycle, for like right now, we're working on Back for Blood. We've got zombie-ish type characters. And so we have, I think, 3, maybe 4 walk cycles. And those walk cycles are used throughout the whole game for all of the different basic zombies. You've got like a slow walk, you've got a faster one, you've got one where like they're really limping, and then you blend those into the other things. So like if the zombie's limping, but then you get close enough, it goes into like an alert animation, and then it might go into the faster walk cycle animation or like a run. And all of the code is all handled. Like right now we're using Unreal. At Carbine, we used a proprietary engine called Genesis, and working at Obsidian, I used Crytek. All of those engines are going to handle it slightly differently, but all the artist is really doing is submitting an FBX that has the information embedded in it.
I would like to chime in really quick. If you're using Unity 5, you do have to use your code to trigger the animation, and the code to do so is literally one line. You're just setting the animation state. But that has not been the case ever since they go into the yearly release. So ever since Unity 6 or 2017, well now it's 2020, basically everything is, as Chair mentioned, is going through basically the animator the workflow. So essentially, you're essentially still setting the values, basically like how fast your character is moving or what your character is doing. So you're constantly setting code to the state of the character, and the animation will reflect and basically flow into each other. So the code to make the hand go across the screen, you basically have to set your character state to, let's say, waving or stancing. So essentially, you will have to set the state to that, and then the animation will the animation engine will pick up on your character state and make the animation happen. And
Okay.
and how many times do you want to try that out? You probably want, depending on the camera and how you render this out, it's one thing to make the character wave your hand. It's another thing for the character to move the hand in front of the camera. You basically have so many things interconnected. You probably want to test that thing at least a couple dozen times just to get this, just to get it look right and then to make it look perfect. Couple hundred times more.
Okay. Yeah. My experience with Unity is very limited. And I've worked at studios with teams big enough that I'm in a bubble and I don't have to worry about any of that design stuff, thankfully.
Well, university, while working with free engine and Unity is just much easier to use than Unreal.
Sure. Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's definitely powerful. I know that Pillars of Eternity was done in that while I was working at Obsidian. I was on a different team though, so.
Unity, if there's something that you want to do, there's a good chance that there is a plugin in the Unity store that will do close enough to the thing you want to do that it's worthwhile to pull it down, test it out, see if it will fit your use case, and then go, yeah, I'll spend the $5 to $15 to get this plugin or whatever. I think with Knee Deep, we had probably 15 or 20 different plugins running, like on top of the engine itself at launch. Basically, just because each one did a very specific thing that we wanted to try and do with the game itself. So Unity is pretty powerful with regards to that, because like if there's something that you want to do, there's a good chance some really smart programmer out there has already thought of it and is like, okay, here's the best way to do that, and then released that bit of code as a plugin on the Unity store.
Cool. Now we have one more question from our gallery, and I actually might take a stab at this one first. What are the most important skills to develop in college to become a world builder / designer? Both at Carbine and at Fallen Earth, I was given dispensation to be a world builder. So for me, what I found really valuable was actually building tabletop war game models that you'd maneuver miniatures through and so forth. And secondly, my background in college was in film. So you're always thinking about tableau and what the camera is looking at. And that's exactly what you have to be thinking about, what the player will be looking at. Because like when you're working in a big 3D tool, you're always looking top down pretty much. And if it's a first person game, you've got to be constantly thinking about what does this look like when you're walking through it? What does it look like when the camera's moving through it? So like just learning some basic like film and camera handling, skills, terminology, thinking about tableau, which is like what the scene is set as. I found that very valuable when I transitioned into the video game industry and was doing world building. Now I'll turn it over to Corey and Chad. What do you think are the most important skills in college to become a world builder?
I'm going to tack on to exactly what you said, Josh, is that also why is all this stuff there, right? As you're moving through the environment, why is that room that you just entered in the condition that it's in? What's the story behind that? If you're working on a big game with a lot of levels with a big team, you're going to have a selection of houses, let's say, right? You've got 6 or 7 different houses, different floor plans. Well, those houses are used all throughout your game. You don't want the player, every time they walk into that house, to realize that they're walking into that house. So the things on the inside of that house need to tell a different story. Different posters on the wall, different furniture sets, the furniture arranged in a different way, et cetera, right? Because my apartment that I actually live in is exactly the same floor plan as the one next to me. But I guarantee they don't look the same. When you walk in, you're not going to feel like you're in the same place. So story. Right now, we're making a zombie game. So we're looking at places in the country like Michigan and Pennsylvania that aren't in the best condition right now, where you can buy a house for $1,000. And why did that house end up like that? What does the yard look like now that it is like that? What does the paint look like? All the metal, etc. Story building, I think, is huge when it comes to world building and design. and flow, like Josh said, of how you're getting to place and what it looks like.
Yeah, I would add on the point to flow. I would like highly suggest that anybody who wants to be a world builder play through the first Halo, if for no other reason than to play the Silent Cartographer level, is one of the greatest first person experiences ever. Like the level, you land on the beach, you have this arena that lets you walk around in for a few moments, and then all these covenants start coming in, and you have to fight them. And once you've defeated them, you can go all the way around the whole island, and then you kind of make your way toward the center of the island, where you have this giant boss fight between these two brutes, and they're trying to kill. But that whole level, the flow, the way each area builds into the next one, and then you descend into this other area that you have to unlock something, and then you exit out of that and have to escape. That whole level is one of the greatest first-person shooter levels ever, and just kind of study the subject matter. It doesn't necessarily even have to be Halo, but study the subject matter that you're trying to build homages to, or build new experiences that kind of expand the genre in one way or another. So yeah.
And don't get too caught up on the software that you're using either to make these things. We've got, well, okay, for instance, when I was in college, I learned Maya. And then when I was at Carbine, we used Softimage, XSI. And then when I got to Obsidian, we used 3ds Max. And now that I'm at Turtle Rock, I am using 3ds Max to do my modeling and UVing, and I'm using Maya to do my rigging and animating. And the guy next to me is using Blender to do his modeling, and the other guy on the other side is using SketchUp to bust out proxies for us so that we can get Graybox going in the world. So don't, the companies are going to ask for knowledge in a specific software. Really, all of the software is the same. It's all going to do the same thing. What you need to learn is the UI and the terminology. But basically, an extrude in Max is an extrude in Maya. So as long as you have the terminology down and you can pick up the UI real quick and where the things are, you're going to be fine.
I would also like to add that in order for you to be a good world building and designer, you have to defend your content, because a lot of times when we're working on things here, I will ask our students, like, is that object right there really adding to the scene? Does it actually serve a purpose? If it doesn't, do we want to take it out so we can save on some GPUs? Or do we want to replace it with some simpler mesh so that we can save on the GPUs? So we're constantly pitching on stuff like that. So basically, to see whether or not they're able to defend why that object should be there.
Absolutely, that all comes back to story too, and like Corey said, using things multiple times. You don't want one big expensive mesh to only be used once unless it's important and it backs that story up. Absolutely.
We have a follow-up question. So I play a lot of D&D. How much of D&D would be useful for developing skills for being a world builder or designer? Again, I'll take a stab at this. That's 100% how I got into video games, and my portfolio was largely maps of battlefields for Mordheim. So building levels inside of dungeons for Dungeons and Dragons, even though it's paper design, it is very valuable, I think. So Corey and Chad, you can add to that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. The most I learned about Dungeons and Dragons was from watching Stranger Things. But it's huge in this industry. A lot of my friends play it. I've recently gotten, well, not recently, the last couple of years, I've gotten into 3D printing, and a lot of my friends are having me print miniatures and stuff for them. And because of my lack of knowledge, I had no idea that all the complexity that goes into those games. I walked by a conference room once at Obsidian, and they had a whole giant grid paper map laid out, and these little bridges and drawings all over. And that stuff to me is amazing. It comes back to the story, and just thinking about how things are going to play out, how it's going to be played. I guess that's the same thing. But I mean, like how the story is going to play out, right, and how you're going to traverse through the environment. I think you're thinking about that in a 2D kind of way in Dungeons and Dragons. You could probably pretty easily put it in a 3D.
And built into that too are basically choice points that players can make. So if you come to a T intersection, you say, which direction am I going to go? Okay, this one opens out to a courtyard, and this one goes into an alleyway. That's visually something that you can build on, and say, okay, this is useful because we can place certain story elements out here, or allow the player to choose if they're going to go that route or change trajectories and go over here instead. And a lot of that happens in D&D because you're constantly having to kind of anticipate what your players are going to do. Because for all you know, they could get really interested in one thing and focus in on that, and you haven't necessarily written in a story specifically for that, so you have to kind of do it on the fly. And a lot of that happens in video games where basically, you get to a certain point and then you say, okay, we're going to have to improvise X, Y, or Z. And so everybody has to kind of put their heads together and kind of reinvent the wheel. One really big example I can think of is Borderlands. They had the game like 80 to 85% complete, I think, in one art style. And the artists were all like, this isn't working. What can we do to fix it? And so they kind of formed this like 3 or 4 person brain trust. I think there was an animator, a texture artist, and a world builder in that. And they went off to the side and literally redeveloped the entire art style in the game and sprung it on everybody and was like, look, this is what we did. This is how we think the game should end up looking. And Borderlands as we know it would not exist without what happened in that one instance of everyone getting to a point of being like, okay, this isn't working. What do we do? And one group of people coming off and saying, okay, here's our idea, and pitching that to everyone else.
I'll also add on one more thing. I got my first job in the video game industry at Icarus Studios solely on the fact that I had very high polished printed materials for Warhammer and Mordheim, which is very similar to Dungeons and Dragons. And I had no digital game experience at all. And like I said, I went on to becoming a world builder for Fallen Earth encounter areas. And I wasn't even in the art department. So it's just, yeah, it can be a make it or break it, where you're just showing that, yeah, you understand the design of encounter spaces. And like I said, I had mine, printed out in a very high level of, could have went into a magazine. And I think that's what, impressed the people interviewing me.
One thing to keep in mind about the game industry is that content is king. It doesn't matter if you can actually do the artwork program or anything like that. You can, if you have the idea, you can easily hire artists to draw things for you and hire a programmer to make it into reality for you. So I know a lot of studios. They basically just the couple people sit down, draw things out on the paper, draw out their concepts, and then submit that to other studios for them to develop it and end up making a lot of money, like Cuphead. Last year I talked to the developers. They basically say these two brothers just sit down, drew all this amazing art and doesn't know like basically how to technique the game. And the firm in Durham to say we got it, and they basically made everything possible, somehow able to translate their art design into the full-fledged game. So if you have the idea, if you can draw on paper and pencil, that is probably the most important thing about you can have in this industry.
Even still, all of our pitches at some point or other are just Photoshop images that get thrown into a PowerPoint and then pitched to a publisher, and a few $1 million later, we got a game.
Mm-hmm. that's why whenever I talk to the student about coming with new project, I always tell them, don't limit yourself, because if you start to think about how to make it happen, you are basically limiting your creativity. Don't worry about how to make it possible. Just go and pitch me some idea. Just pitch me anything. Let me worry about how to make it happen.
Yeah, shoot for the moon and then dial it back with starting small. Because the problem with starting small is always you can get a core game mechanic together, and then wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be cool if, and then 1,000 wouldn't it be cool ifs later, you have so much feature creep that the game never comes out. And we've seen that time and again. Like Duke Nukem Forever literally took what 14 years to come out because it's like it was at a constant state of 80-ish% finished, and someone would constantly come to meetings going, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did X, Y, or Z? And then the game never came. So rather than, hey, let's do this one really cool thing very, very well, and shutter everything other than that one core game mechanic. That's like always the most important thing. And I think too few studios realize that is that core game mechanics, a fun game loop. You have that, everything else is gravy.
I have a question for you guys. Talk to me about what you've done to kill your babies, or like or how you've had to deal with producers where something's just not panning out. Talk a little bit about that.
In this industry, if you can't handle your work getting completely torn apart and or apps just thrown in the trash, do not start in this industry. A good example was WildStar. That game not only suffered from feature creep, but some other issues in management and production. And we had whole zones that were modeled out and designed as spawn points, crit path areas, everything completely done. All the foliage and everything all placed and animated to never ever see the light of day. And I've had numerous projects, whole projects where we're working on that, we're working on a prototype or working to get a green light, and you'll work for 6 months and they green light, then you get to that last milestone and they say, hey, yeah, so this was really fun, but we've decided to go in another direction. And there's just nothing you can do about it. If it really bums you out, I'm not advocating stealing assets from your company, but if you're allowed to plug in a USB drive and take your stuff with you, then you should. At least then you could show it off later.
I'm in precisely the industry where exfiltration is my enemy. So I'm the guy, I'm currently now the guy locking down the USB ports so that can't happen. Granted, I work in the medical field now, so that's far more of a critical issue than people grabbing a couple of textures and meshes. But I would say for me, the biggest instance of killing my baby was the number of times in Fallen Earth that we reworked the tutorial level. I think all said and done, we probably reworked the tutorial no less than 10 times. I remember building out the entirety, start to finish, of the level that was initially supposed to be the tutorial level, when we were finally like, okay, this game has enough core game mechanics to where we need to convey them to the player somehow. I'm like, okay, I'll go ahead and start on the level. I orange boxed it out, made sure everything flowed really well. You spawn up, you have an enemy standing in the corner, you punch him to death, he drops a weapon. Now you're able to use that weapon. It tells you how reticles work, all this other stuff. I think that iteration of the tutorial lasted about 3 months. And then they're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if instead of doing that, so our game is set in the Grand Canyon, wouldn't it be cool if we had the Hoover Dam be the first thing you encounter? So the tutorial level now became the game, and I had to literally throw away 100% of the work that I had done prior to that. It was literally a working start to finish tutorial. We threw all that away. I think we had a couple of the like spawn point generators and some of the character brains, like the AI, was still present in the final one, but that was it. Everything else got thrown away. And started again fresh, made this whole new level, and then I think 3 or 4 more iterations after that of reworks. It finally ended up in the state that it launched with. And then even after launch, we reworked it an 11th time to cut off a bunch of the extraneous stuff that we're like, actually, this doesn't really teach you. So it shouldn't be in the tutorial.
Oh, Chad can
How
talk
many
to you about
times was
screwing with the tutorial at WildStar.
yeah? How many times did we redo Northern Wilds? Oh my god.
The last time before the game went offline, I started a new tune and I didn't even recognize the tutorial. I was like, what in the world happened here? I was like, all of a sudden we're there. There's a tutorial on how to ride the stupid hoverboard. What? Why? I was like, and then meanwhile, everything you really did need to know wasn't even in there anymore. I was like, yeah, somebody went crazy, and yeah, I don't know. It's indicative that companies try to rework the tutorial ad nauseum, and I'm like, you guys need to stop.
Every project I've ever been on has been like that. The tutorial is, even if it's not, an afterthought, which it has tended to be, it's still constant redo. And I think part of that also is if you get it done really early on, you've got all these eyes on it, you just get bored of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's better if the tutorial just gets thrown off until the last minute. That way all the stuff can be done. That way all the main mechanics and everything is in, and you can utilize all of that stuff. But yeah, that's definitely been an issue on pretty much every project I've been on.
Yeah, a wise QA guy that I knew from Icarus Studios, Jeremiah. You remember him, Corey?
Mm-hmm.
He's absolutely the phrase "familiarity breeds contempt" is rampant in the video game industry.
Yep.
We will throw away perfectly good content just because it's
sick of looking at it.
Sick of looking at it, even though we know players haven't seen it, and it would play fine with someone who hasn't seen it. And like, yeah, I constantly remind myself even that just you can't be critical of something just because you've gotten bored with it.
It's also contrary to popular thought, you should not necessarily apply to a studio to work on your dream game. It will no longer be your dream game. You will hate that game after you are done because you've seen all the iterations. You know all of the things that have happened. I haven't played a single game that I've devved, pretty much.
Yeah, because every time you log into the game, you're going to look at that one asset. You're like, man, I really wish I could have spent another hour and a half getting that texture just right. When you should be enjoying playing the game. And it's funny because after having left the industry, looking back on it, I was like, wow, I did not realize how much working in it killed my love of the hobby.
Yep.
Isn't exactly what happened in Naughty Dog? So many people want to go in there, make The Last of Us the greatest game ever. So they go in there, every single designer change up the scenes that they were working on. So the next morning when other people show up, suddenly they're making a completely different game. So it's just ever changing, ever evolving.
You can't really get attached to anything in this industry.
But do you guys still hide some of your really proud work in as Easter egg for your other scenes?
I like putting my signature in different places. That's been my favorite thing to hide. And I like when I have to make posters. Like right now, I've made a slew of posters for Back for Blood, and there's lines at the bottom of them, about asking you why you're reading a poster when you should be running from zombies. And I break the fourth wall and tell them, hey, this isn't a game. Oh, I guess it is, but you should still run. And there's a couple tanks in World of War, Armored Warfare, where if you get them just right and you turn the turret at just the right angle and the sun's shining at like the right height, you could see my initials painted into the bottom of the turrets and stuff like that. So things like that are definitely fun. We have to entertain ourselves with things like that. And I think probably every one of my artist buddies has something like that they do.
Yeah, I like putting my signature in specularity maps.
Nice.
So you can only really see it whenever the sun touches it just in just such a way. Like, wait a second, there's words there.
Everyone does that. All of the lights that you carry around in Face Your Fears 2, and I did like the old Coleman lantern with the mantles in it, and instead of the Coleman logo, it's just got my signature right there.
All right, we got another question from the gallery, and this follow on from what we're talking about building a dream game. So, like, how would you go about building your dream game? Do you get involved with a company, or do you go the indie route, or really kind of like what would you do there?
Yeah, if you want to build your dream game, I would definitely say small studio, indie studio, your own studio. But if there's a game out there that you really, really want to work on, uh, don't plan on playing it. If there's a game that you really enjoy playing, this is a very specific example. I love car racing games. I'm really big on cars in real life. I've put in thousands of hours into the Forza franchise. I was just hit up 3 days ago by their technical animation recruiter, and I can't. There's no way I would ever be involved in one of those games because then I don't think I would enjoy playing them anymore. So building your dream game, I think, is different. That's something you could even do in your spare time if you've got a couple buddies, a programmer buddy, a designer buddy. Maybe you wear multiple hats and do some of that stuff, or starting a studio up. There's always startups happening. But I wouldn't plan on going to a studio because you really like the games they make and working on them.
Chad, isn't the Forza studio like near the Arctic Circle too? I don't think that would be cool either.
It's up in Seattle. Well, Turn 10 up in Seattle is the one that hit me up. But yeah, I believe they have one over in.
It's like in
I
Sweden.
don't know. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, not somewhere I'd want to go. I'm used to Southern California.
Yeah, I got hit up for systems designer to work on a Forza game, and I was like, my math is not good enough for that. So I passed. I was like, yeah, not interested. But I was like, I was like, their studio's 35 miles from the Arctic Circle. I'm not going there. Corey, your thoughts about dream building?
So what's funny is I actually did build my dream game. I've always been a fan of like Tom and Jerry cartoons and just cartoony hand animated stuff in general. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but back in like 2011, 2012, there was this pug dog that this lady dressed up as a Wampa from Star Wars. And it was called Chubbs the Wampug, wherever this animal got all crazy famous on the internet, like internet famous. So we teamed up with the dog's owner to release a game about the dog, and it was basically we put a bunch of animals, cute animals, in wingsuits and cartoony graphics, and I did 100% of the art for that game. It was magnificent. I absolutely loved doing it. I hand animated all of the flips and turns and the celebration animations. The game didn't make any money, of course, because at this point, I think uh, mobile games were so absolutely prolifically ubiquitous that no one by then was willing to pay money for a mobile game. But I enjoyed thoroughly making that because it was mine, and I didn't have to compromise on it in any way, shape, or form. Anything that I wanted in the game that I could produce artwork wise, I did, and that was fantastic. It was a really, really awesome experience to have done that. But after having play tested the game for probably 1,500 hours. I myself will probably never play it again because of that. Like I still like watching the videos from it because I'm like, oh man, I really because we had Chubbs, which was the name of the pug dog that was in it. But we also had a bunch of other characters, one of which was a fennec fox, and I really liked doing the animations for the fennec fox because it was just such a cool little animal and just doing the like basically sitting down with a Wacom pad and just in Photoshop drawing out each frame of animation was a blast, and I loved it. Definitely don't shy away from making your dream game if you can, but try and do it in a setting where you have full control over it. Because at a big studio, that will not happen.
Absolutely.
As a shameless plug, one of the goal I'm trying to push for this game dev organization for ECU is to eventually move into game jam. So to host regular game jams, and then that will move into the next phase of VR and AR development. So unfortunately, due to the recent event, that was it put a damper on that. But we were supposed to basically getting the idea, getting some workshops, and then moving into everybody going in there and pitch idea and make their own game. In I think what's supposed to be doing week-long game jam, and that would be a good opportunity for you to basically say, hey, I have something. Let's go ahead and go make it. So that's what I would have wanted to do. So probably next sometime in the mid semester we're going to do that.
That'll also be a huge benefit for your students. Just being able to bring something like that to an employer is huge. I know that at Carbine we hired one of our designers just because one of the mods he made for StarCraft was really good, and it was fully fleshed out and fully thought through, and that basically that one mod was good enough that he got the job. So that kind of stuff's amazing. I highly encourage that. It's awesome.
Yeah, mods and game jam games have also uh, got the chance, although slim, to become multi-million dollar things too. You've got Goat Simulator, Surgeon Simulator, Dota. Dota was a mod. It started out as a mod, and now all three of the guys that made that mod together are multimillionaires because they came up with an idea that was built on something else and made it into its own thing.
The Orange Box is another great example of that. The Portal was a total afterthought. It was just a little side project that a couple guys up at Valve wanted to do, and it became its own huge phenomenon all on its own. So, but again, Valve is it's relatively small as far as their development team goes. So.
I'll add one thing else to bring it back around to building your dream game. You don't necessarily need to be able to do every piece of it yourself. You can always paper design out a game and have everything ready to go when you do have the team and the talent, or have the talent develop on your own. I basically, how I got into the game industry was I wanted to further develop a tabletop 4X game. It was hex based, and I basically just paper designed all of it. Then later on, the video game industry showing to people, they're like, this would make an awesome video game. So I have a fully fleshed out 4X game that you can play on a tabletop that is locked and loaded to be developed as a regular digital game as well. So yeah, never underestimate paper designing.
Absolutely. And even Mario back in the day was done on just grid paper in the very beginning. So don't let any limitations stifle your creativity.
That was good advice.
See, it's 8:05. We might wrap up early unless our students have any other further questions. Or anybody got anything? Juan, you're more of a tech artist type person than I am. I'm more of a world buildery type. Like I said, I worked with both these guys, so I know a lot of their story already.
Just my brain is always working basically off brand. So how important is it to get yourself a Wacom?
Oh man, I mean, I've gotten so used to mine. I can't work without it. I even paint weights when I'm rigging with it. I mean, if you're doing any kind of texture work, it's absolutely necessary. Uh, yeah, I have gone through a couple of those things in this industry. I wear them out. But it's an absolutely wonderful investment. I would you should absolutely buy one. I don't recommend a Cintiq necessarily, but get yourself a little medium Wacom Pro. I really like my wireless one. It makes my life a lot easier. You will absolutely use it when you get used to it.
I like to say you can do game art without a Wacom, but I liken it to trying to carve a statue with a brick as opposed to a chisel.
It's you can do everything with clicking, but every time you click, if you want to adjust opacity, then you're just wasting extra clicks to drag a bar around, you know. And with a pen, you just lighten the pressure up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not much of an artist, but right now sitting in front of me is a Cintiq 22 and a Cintiq 26 HD, and that makes yeah, usually before back in the days when it's just since I'm not much an artist, drawing something on Photoshop take hours, and now minutes I can get some really quick sketch down.
Yeah, if I could afford a Cintiq or had room for one, I probably would. But you know how many drones that can buy?
That's a whole nother different story.
Government
The
grant,
main
man.
reason I
Government
got into
grant.
3D printing.
Oh yeah, yeah. 3D printing is the plunge that I'm just on the edge of taking.
My neighbor mentioned that you can get one for around $200 right now, and I'm like, that's getting close to me being able to take the plunge myself. I'm like, 200. I can pretty easily justify that.
They're amazing. For an artist, I can have something on my computer screen right now, and in a few hours it shows up in my garage. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I find myself going through like Sketchfab, just looking at a bunch of cool looking models. Like, man, if I could have a physical version of this, that would be awesome.
I mean, we don't need a baby Yoda, but last year one of my students printed out like 20 of them.
Yeah, I've got one of those. I've got an entitled goose too with a magnet in its bill so that you can hold your keys and stuff.
It's amazing. Are you doing the filament or resin?
I do filament, but I've got friends that do resin. I'm the Turtle Rock printing guru, though. I run what we call learning lunches, an hour at a time, and run people through. Sometimes they'll just bring in their machines and have me troubleshoot and fix them. Resin is really cool, especially if you're doing like the Dungeons and Dragons stuff. It really can't be beat, but it's messy, it stinks, and it's expensive. A quart of resin runs about $160.
Wow.
If you don't use it, it dries out, and you can't leave it in your printer. When you're done doing your prints, if you're not going to print for a couple of days, you have to empty it out and then clean the printer, and it's a whole nother hassle. So if I'm going to print miniatures, I print really low layer height, and I print slow on my filament printer, and it works out pretty well.
That's good advice.
So I assume as artists that your art skills for digital are very useful for 3D printing.
Absolutely. It's most of these guys that are doing 3D printing are using CAD-based programs. I do all my modeling for printing inside Studio Max, so it'll export the right file formats, and I've printed out a couple characters from our games and whatnot that I've worked on in the past. I printed out a little tank from Armored Warfare, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's the one avenue that I've been telling that our artists at ECU that board gaming is very big right now, and they need very detailed game pieces these days that border on exactly like D&D level detail. And so designing for printers and for molds is also a very, useful skill set. You're still in game design, but you're just designing a different kind of piece.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple character modelers that do that in their spare time and make a nice little chunk of change selling miniatures on the side.
Outstanding. So let's see here. Like I said, you guys probably have better things to do after this. Any last questions from our students, and we might wrap up a little bit early here. Oh, there we go. This was more for us.
Yeah, I can't answer that one.
Yeah. Juan, we will probably post these someplace, right? Or at least send out a link in the email.
Oh, we can.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll make sure that we get these out to you guys so that you can revisit them. Yeah, our previous one was a live action coding tutorial that Quan hosted.
Very cool.
So yeah, we're trying.
Hey, you can feel free to hand out my information if any of your students want to reach out after watching this, or they have any questions afterward. Feel free. You can hit me up with any of your questions. I'll give you critiques on your reel, your portfolio if you want. To get you a leg up, whatever you need. It's awesome. I just want to help out.
We certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, I would second that for sure.
But yeah, we're again this social distancing thing kind of put a crimp in our game dev dialogues. We were rolling until this happened, and we're trying to keep the ball going a little bit, and we're trying to have better game designers come out of the university. Is my way of helping to give back.
Very laudable goal, I would say.
Heck yeah, and hey, you want to do this again, Josh? I'll gladly come back, man.
Sure, absolutely. We're probably going to be doing these in the fall again. This is probably the last one for this semester. We're basically just leveraging, all of our skill sets, all of our contacts to give people a good idea of what it's like to be in the industry. And with that, I think we will say we absolutely appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to speak to us and allowing us to record this, because again, this will go into our archives. We got a nice Microsoft team for our video game development and VR, AR development, and people that weren't able to make it live will at least be able to peruse it at their leisure later. Yeah, we might revisit this again soon. We certainly appreciate it, and thank you for having it, and our students appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here and listening to us.
All right, no worries. Like I said, feel free to put this on your resumes and CVs that you were an invited speaker to a university. I know that's always looks good.
Appreciate it, Josh.
No worries, guys. You have a good one now.
Happy Friday Eve at this point.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Have a good one.
You too, man.